Hey everybody, it's Joe Roberts at OneWineDude.com, and I'm going to teach you just about everything you need to know about port. Maybe not everything, but we're going to talk about port. I got port on the mind this week, and the goal is to give you a simplified version of the world of port in 5 minutes or less. And as the weather turns cooler here, especially in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Philly area, I start thinking about wines like this because they warm me up inside because they have a high alcohol content, around 19–20%. A little bit of background first. Port is from Portugal. Okay, so a lot of people use the word port as a style, but port is an actual wine made in Portugal. Okay, so if it isn't from Portugal, it's not really port per se. And favored by the British, it is a fortified wine. So what happens is, as the wine is fermenting, mostly it's grapes in the Douro in Portugal, and as that wine is fermenting from those grapes, almost always a blend, okay, they hit it with some grape spirit during fermentation, and that alcohol content of the spirit kills off the yeast. That leaves some sugar in the fermenting juice that is not fermented, and so you get the natural sweetness of the sugar and the strength, the warming quality of the spirit. And the thing that's probably going to blow your mind a little bit is that there are only really two kinds of ports. And I know you go in the shop and you see a billion different things. There's Tawny and Reserve and Vintage and Colheita and Single Quinta, and you're like, what the heck is all this? There are two kinds. That's it. Okay. Everything else is a derivative of the two. Either the port is aged in wood or it's not aged in wood. And that's pretty much the big separating factor. And 90 whatever, 9%, I don't know, of the port that you're going to encounter is aged in wood. Okay, so we'll start with the port that's not aged in wood and is meant to age in bottle. That is the big granddaddy, the grand poobah of the whole thing, vintage port. That is wine that will age literally for decades. It will go and go and go. You get a lot of bright red, black, and blue fruits, tons of spices, and these wines will just go and go and go. Of course, the fruits are sweet. They can be almost syrupy, but in an awesome way, like you want to spread them on waffles or something. It can be amazing. And I've had some of the best recent vintages, 94, 2007. These are still babies, okay? It's like infanticide to open these wines right now. They will go. This kind of stuff you buy, you set it down for your kids and your grandkids. Great stuff. It has a baby brother, which is Single Quinta vintage port, okay? Not quite as complex, but still pretty awesome and usually pretty expensive. All right, so this brings us then to the wood aged side of things. And there's really three general kinds of wood aged. Okay, the first is white port. Most people think that's just something you stick into an aperitif or a portini or mixed drink. But I've actually had some that were unfiltered and pretty intense and paired with venison. So they run the gamut, but generally speaking, the white ports are going to be relatively inexpensive and not so great on their own, usually, although there's some exceptions, okay? The second is tawny port. Now, this is port that's sort of Solaris style, aged, blended, sometimes from different years, and there are various tiers and aspects of that. The ones that you'll encounter a lot of times will just say tawny, or will come, they have some certain aging requirements, won't go into that in the 5 minutes, but some of them will actually have an indication of age, which technically speaking is supposed to be the average age of the years blended in, 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year. We're going to talk more about that later this week on OneWineDude.com, so check that out. I'm going to run through 10, 20, 30, 40-year tawny ports. Now, you got to think, in terms of tawny, it's a very different setup from white ports or from vintage. This is stuff that's nutty and caramelly, and almost has a sherry note, like an oxidative note. Really good stuff with like nuts and cheeses. Great stuff for after dinner. Love it, love it, love it. And you'll find those in various incarnations, as I said. Generally speaking, the older the aged designated tawnies are, the more expensive they're going to be, okay, and theoretically better. Now, these tawnies, they'll actually keep for a little bit. So vintage ports, you pop them open, and pretty much like any other wine, I mean, they'll age in bottle for a long time, any other great wine, I should say. But they'll dissipate pretty quickly. It's sort of like, you open a bottle of white or red still wine, you're going to get a couple days out of it. Same thing with the vintage port. Tawnies will actually go a little bit longer. Like you can actually you keep that thing cold in your fridge, you pop it back out, and you'll probably get a couple weeks of drinking out of a tawny, a good one anyway. So much more to come about tawnies on the blog later. Finally, you get what we call ruby ports. These are ports that tend less towards that sherry oxidative, nutty side, much more towards brighter fruit, dried fruit, and spicy, peppery notes. Okay, and I've got they come in various designations too. Okay, won't get into all those, but and we're going to try a ruby port, Cockburn Special Reserve. All right, we'll run you about 16 to 18 bucks, and it's 19.5%. You got this as a sample. Got a few. We're gonna give it a whirl while I'm pouring. I should tell you something, not about reserves, but about tawnies. I had a dinner in Portugal with members of the IVDP who basically decide whether or not you're going to have a vintage port, whether or not you can put 10-year, 20-year tawny on your port, etc. Great people to have a dinner with, especially when they're serving ports, okay? And theoretically, this is interesting, theoretically, like a 10-year or 20-year tawny could actually not have wine that old in it, but it needs to taste like a wine that has that kind of aging. And I talked to some of the guys and said, well, couldn't theoretically I make a port, a tawny style, and try and fool you guys and get a designation for wine that's actually much younger, but still stick a 20-year tawny designation on it? And they said, yeah, you could, but I'd like to see you try it, because basically this is what they do all day, every day, is taste this stuff. And I know we're already over 5 minutes, but I know you guys give me a break. I think I summed this stuff up in under 5. Anyway, on to the review portion. I like to have these guys a little bit chilled, just to bring out the red fruits. This is a pretty decent wine. It's got some like date qualities to it, figgy, and there is that nice little peppery, spicy note that you want to really get out of a ruby port. And a lot of times on these wines, the fortified bit, that grape spirit, has a little bit of a burn, and so you can get on the lower ends, especially on rubies, almost too much of a burn, and it feels like a little out of balance on that. In this case, they've done a pretty good job of balancing it up. In fact, you could have even turned up the sweetness maybe a little bit on how this one was made. So it's got a nice sort of genteel reserve quality about it. Very, very solid B wine for me, at least, and I think really fairly priced at 16 to 18 bucks. So there you go, Cockburn Special Reserve Porto. Not a bad introduction to the ruby style. So I hope this helped you out, and that you got a little bit more confidence when you're heading into the wine shop around Christmas time and you're thinking about trying some ports for a nice by the fireside after dinner, showing off your wine shop stuff. So cheers, and tune back in and later this week, and we'll get into the tawny bit.